evening, everyone, and welcome to Love Books. It's really lovely to have all of you here tonight for a poetry evening. Thank you so much for coming. It does feel like ages since Manthipe is in shock. It looks like. It seems like ages since we've hosted a poetry evening, so it really is lovely to be doing it again tonight, especially since this is such a stunning collection. So congratulations, Manthipe, on this really gorgeous, earthy volume of beautiful poetry. I've really loved reading it, and it's wonderful to have you here tonight. Thank you. I'd just like to mention Ushlanga Press, who are the publishers of Rootbound. They are a small independent poetry press. They were founded and run by Nick Mulgrew. I think they've been around for 10 or so years. You probably know better than me, Maneo. But as with many independent presses, they perform such important work finding and publishing new voices, which this is something that the bigger publishers often fail to do. And it's something we desperately need here as well. So not only are their poets and their poetry amongst the best you can find, but as you can see, their books always look absolutely beautiful, beautifully designed and put together. So thanks to Ushlanga and onwards and upwards to them. Just a little bit about Manthipe. She was born in 1994, so she's a true child of democracy. She holds a BA Honours in English Literature from Rhodes University. Her poetry has been widely published, including in New Contrast, Kalahari Review, Thapelo Quarterly, and many, many more. She's from Joburg, but is currently based in Seoul, South Korea. Rootbound is her first book. Yeah, congratulations. And then one of the best poetry readings we've ever had at this shop, and which I still remember so well, was the launch of Maneo Mohale's Everything is a Deathly Flower. It was an amazing event. So it really is lovely to have Maneo back here tonight to interview Manthipe. Thank you so much for being here. Maneo, of course, is also a poet and the author of Everything is a Deathly Flower, which I wanted to say we have stocked since the day it was published, which I think is over 6 years ago, and we still sell it. And that is exactly. Thank you, Anna. So thank you, Maneo. Wonderful to have you back here. And over to the two of you.
Hi, everyone. So wonderful also just to see people out, in celebration of poetry books and in celebration of debut poets. It's a strange feeling to be back here. 6 years after the publication of Everything Is, but it feels so good to be back here to launch this fantastic collection. I had the pleasure of hosting Manthipe online as part of a collective called the Red Wheelbarrow Poetry Collective, and the time difference was quite large. What was the time difference at that time?
It's 7 hours.
7 hours. You could do it. You're going to have to.
It's on. Is it on? Yes.
Hello?
There we go. Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
So the time difference was 7 hours.
It was 7 hours.
Yes, yeah. And it feels beautiful also to be in here in meat space and flesh space.
It's nice to meet IRL.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
I am going to get out of the way and be as deeply unobtrusive as humanly possible. I think that poetry sings the deepest and in the most gorgeous notes when we let the poet speak for themselves and read for themselves. I'll just poke and prod with questions here and there. But I wanted Manthipe to maybe select 3 of their favorite poems, of your favorite poems, and then we can go from there. If you can read them, and then I'll ask questions about that.
Sure.
Sounds good?
Can I steal a copy?
Yeah, steal that one. It's yours.
Hopefully not for long. Okay. So I think it's fitting to begin with the opening poem called Dedication. And this poem is a dedication to my younger self. The entire collection is actually a dedication to my younger self. I wrote it for little Manti, who had internalized a lot of harmful things from her environment, from her world, and I wanted her to feel seen, and I wanted her pain to be named. And so I'm going to open with Dedication 1. Dedication 1. Today, you happen upon a tweet by a white girl your age. 3 things black girls don't have: long hair, a boyfriend, fathers. You ponder the gush of girls turned ghost, the dust that gathers them, absence marking the spot. You wonder at this world where blackness in girl form is a round, rotating emptiness that only holds in a disappearing hand. Put it in a portrait, and there a hole appears. Put it on a path, a hole appears. And in a home, it breaks, like a strand breaks, or a tooth. Make it the size of this room, and it seems there is no one here, sitting at this desk, writing this poem. Okay, my next favorite poem. I don't know, it's kind of hard to choose. I think even though the subject matter of the poetry collection is kind of heavy, I tried to have as much fun as possible with it, and I tried to play with form as much as possible, and so I have a bunch of shape poems in here. One of my favorite being one that's called Monstera variegata. Not Monstera variegata, Monstera deliciosa, which, if anyone's seen my apartment, I have like 30 plants in there, and it's this big, so it's mostly plants and maybe a shirt.
For those following around, Monstera deliciosa is on page 48.
Page 48, yes. Monstera deliciosa. This evening, you think of your aunt's magnificent garden and want her to teach you how to grow more perforations on your monstera, though you desire to speak only about nodes, the unfurling of leaves, aerial roots. And she might ask if you ever think of starting a family, and you about propagating in water, and she about how often you think about Jesus, and you about how to keep the leaves from browning, and she about when you are coming home, and you about the leaves, their sheen. How did she get them to grow so big? And then I'm gonna read another plant poem because I just have to. The plant mommy that I am. It's called Jacaranda mimosifolia. It's on page 19 for anyone who's following. One thing I really miss about being home, the beautiful jacaranda trees that bloom in Joburg and Pretoria. Jacaranda mimosifolia. You have given up your abandonment, the way a boy jumping into a river gives up his shoes. You have given up your hurt, your want, that ancient skin, that old wound. There are moments like this when you walk the streets of Johannesburg with friends or family, bare of yourself, crushing the fallen flowers beneath your school shoes. You do not know you are practicing forgiveness, nor do you know it'll all be for naught. The trees bloomed in Pretoria days ago, and you are smelling time already gone, a belated world of violet, one that your father will slip into and never return from.
What I absolutely love about your poetry is that there's this strange and uncanny mixture of textures, that there's this delicacy in your voice and a delicacy in the prose, but this I like the English word redolent, in the way that it smells. It's so full of something, but sensational and sensual. And your work is so redolent with grief, that there's so much loss, but the way that you overlay plants, as someone who loves plants too, and who takes a lot of inspiration drawing from nature. And it's so wonderful also to encounter the Latin taxonomic sort of names as well, because there's such nerdy passion inside of that. But the image that I got so much in reading your poetry is this image of propagation, of movement, of moving plants from one space to another and hoping that they grow and caring for them and watching roots sprout in water or in soil. And so much of the growth is either unseen, as roots are, that it's a tethering, but there's such a desire for home. So I wanted to ask, or maybe start with the notion of home, as someone who calls many spaces in this world home. But let's start with that. What does home mean to you?
I think that's the question that I was trying to answer with this collection is, what is home? Especially in an increasingly globalized world, where we live, maybe far away from home, or we are intimate or in close contact with people who are far away from us geographically, linguistically. What is home? In terms of like who you call family, what is home? And I think, as with difficult questions, I kind of got close to the answer, but I didn't quite get it, right? It is a collection about journeying, and I think one of the answers I came upon with home is that, trite as it might sound, is that home is really what you make of it, what you create, and what you decide. I think that's increasingly true. It used to be different, right? Home is just the place that you were born, and you usually didn't really have the opportunity to go beyond that space. But yeah, for me, home is the people that I love. Home is the languages that I grapple with and that punch me in the face. Home is the spaces I inhabit, and home is my plants, which, anywhere I go, I'm going to make sure that they're going to be there. And isn't that beautiful? Right? Yeah, that I can take them with me.
Definitely. I think I also want to dig around this image of rootedness. I think for globalized, traveling, nomadic, wanderlusty babes.
Hey, is that my new Instagram handle?
Maybe.
Wanderlusty babes.
Yes. Wanderlusty babe as you are, that I'm sure that there has been a deep ache for what one calls one's roots. And I encounter this thread throughout the collection, in which you're grappling with roots, you're grappling with your roots, that here you might have your roots here on the African continent, but then also you're grappling with the language, you're grappling with Korean, which is so beautiful. Both in the reading, I remember with the Red Wheelbarrow reading, one part that was just so affecting was hearing you read poetry in Korean, which was delicious. And I hope that we hear a lot more of.
I read it really badly. Don't believe anything they're saying.
But I could not have known, as not even a cursory knowledge of Korean, not even in my little K-pop dramas and such. I know nothing at all. So it was beautiful to also encounter that sort of texture of struggle. Bell Hooks tells us that language is also a side of struggle. So I want to ask about rootedness in language and the way that it functions in this collection, how you play with that.
Right. So I guess the poetry collection is really a collection about journeying, and it's almost as though there are, multiple journeys that are taking place. The journey of the absent father, the journey of the speaker who is grappling with the loss of this absent father, but then also decides to run away to a different continent where they speak a completely different language with a completely different alphabet. The journey and the transformation of like the growth within a plant. And so for me, I think rootedness is kind of like, it's hard to put down. And I think that's part of the reason why I wrote the collection. It's because I was wondering, who am I and what does it mean for me to live so far away from home? And what does it mean for me to have experienced multiple losses, but one of the most painful losses, which was a loss of my own doing, is the loss of my mother tongue, right? And then what does that mean for me to then try to pick up this other language that is so far away grammatically, linguistically, all of the ways, culturally, from what I know. And so, yeah, I think for me, Rootbound was about sort of like trying to lay down roots as who I am as a person, but also actually I wrote Rootbound. It was my second attempt to get published by Uhlanga. The first attempt was rejected, rightly so, my goodness. That first manuscript you could not pay me to show you. But the second time I went about writing a collection, I asked myself, like, be honest. What is the thing that you need to write before you can write anything else? And so this is kind of me putting my roots down as a writer with something that's deeply personal and something that I needed to go through in order to get over. Yeah.
So relatable, especially as someone who's in the middle of writing and unwriting and rewriting. So it's very encouraging to hear. One of the best pieces of advice that is diffuse, is that the first draft doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to exist. And I'm very proud of you for pushing through rejection, because I think rejection is a terrible feeling. And I can't even think about the scores of writers that never picked up the pen again after, or were just so crushed in their spirits and their hearts. But the perseverance that you showed little Manti, as well as us, is why we have this gift in the world right now, and it's going to grow its own legs and grow its own roots and run around the world, which is such a beautiful thing.
I hope so.
In that vein, and in the vein of language, speaking of your mother tongue, we share a mother tongue.
Oh,
We do.
cool.
We both speak Sesotho.
Yeah.
And I think what's beautiful about loss in that sense, or an absence inside of the mouth on the tongue, is that there is a kind of muscle memory, a body memory, a brain memory, a spirit memory. And I hope that your time back home awakens some of that, and your little roots can kind of come back a little.
Yeah.
That being said, I would love you to read Unsaid. Just one of the poems that I really, really, really loved.
What page is it on?
It's on page 40. And I love your use of refrain and this idea of questions and unwriting.
Right. Okay. So this poem is called Unsaid, and then in Korean, Hwangsa. Hwangsa is kind of this natural phenomenon where a very fine yellow dust kind of blows over from, I think, the east. And so once it lands in Korea, it's actually really affects the air quality to the extent that we have to wear masks just if you're going outside. And what happens is that it tends to happen around the springtime. And so when it rains, the yellow dust like on the ground. And it's this stark yellow, almost chemical color. When you look at it, you're like, I can't believe this comes from nature. But it does. And I wanted to play around with the color yellow. And so, yeah.
Come in and get cozy.
Come on in. Okay, so just a brief explanation so that everyone knows what Hongse is before I start. Instead of the dust is a harsh yellow that stains everything after each rain. Lately, there is something caught in my throat, and it threatens a din that could shatter even the wailing of a mourning creature. Instead of, it gathered speck by speck. Sometimes when I speak, it comes out in a noxious puff that sinks to the ground and captures the footsteps of those walking away from me. Instead of, when I was young, I was so afraid of the sun, lest it strip me of my yellow. But now there are days where I'm a pit, where yellow collects and layers the length of my throat, the pocket of my lungs. Instead of, did you know the sun is not yellow? It is all the colors, all of them. I smile a white smile. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
There's this profound sense of alienation in your work. And I think it's perhaps because you gesture at race obliquely, like you come at it from the side and surprise us in this really interesting sense. I'd love for you to speak a little bit more on your race politic and what it feels like to move embodied as you are across borders, across cultures, across time.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think writing this collection was also a means of kind of healing all of the negative things I had internalized about Black girlhood and Black womanhood growing up. I mean, that opening tweet from Dedication is a tweet that I saw in real life, and I saw that and didn't ask what is wrong with the world. I asked what is wrong with me. And so that's heartbreaking, right? And so, yeah, I kind of try to move through the world, currently telling myself that take up the space that you were so afraid of taking up when you were younger and embrace who you are, embrace your Blackness, and allow it to be something that's malleable and allow it to be something that's, you know, it doesn't put you in a box, but it's something that you can mold and build yourself, and you can breathe meaning and you can breathe life into it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting living in Korea as somebody who, like, very clearly, I mean, maybe I could be Korean. I could be Korean. Look, there are some Koreans who come out looking like me, but I'm not, you know, and a lot of Koreans can tell just by looking, right? It's very interesting kind of moving through the world in my day-to-day feeling a little bit like an alien. But I'm also like, I'm growing into my own skin, and I'm growing into just take up the space. And I think when I was younger, there was a part of me that tried to distance myself from Blackness because I had internalized that, oh, that's the thing that's lower than, less than. That's the thing that's ugly. That's the thing that's stupid. That's the thing that doesn't have any capital, has maybe some cultural capital, but that's it. And so, yeah, I think the collection was me trying to grapple with a lot of things, and my race politic is one of them. Especially that idea of, like, when I was younger, I really was quite afraid of becoming darker skinned. And then when I arrived in Korea, I was like bamboozled by the idea that that was a fear of mine. And it's so interesting to kind of grow up and distance yourself from your ugliest thoughts, and to then inhabit a space where you look at something and you think, that's interesting. How can I poetry that into like something that makes sense to me. Yeah.
There's a sense of grace and self-forgiveness and deep sort of self-tenderness. There's so many poems here where I feel like you're cradling former versions of yourself and younger versions of yourself on the same sort of bent around blackness. A poem that I found that was very interesting is Another Therapist Says Black Men Are Wont to Disappear Like That. I'd love for you to read it and then we can chat about it because I feel like this one's thick, you know? And that's on page 64.
I feel like people need to be careful of the things they say to poets because we will immortalize you, friends. Okay, 64. It's on page 64 for anyone who's following. Also, I'm not to brag or anything, but this poem did get me like shortlisted for a poetry prize. So
you better brag. This is your day to brag. This is your day. You better. You were just talking about taking up space.
Oh, okay.
This is one of the ways that you take up space.
Okay,
that
yeah.
you
So I was
that
a
you own your
finalist,
accolades.
you know,
Yes,
I
tell
was
us
a
which prize, Manthipe.
It's a magazine called Pleiades. It's based in the U.S. and the judge, which I'm so honored, was Sarah Ghazala Lee. She read my poem. What? Okay, that's enough of that. Let's read the actual poem. Another therapist says black men are wont to disappear like that. It is written, prophesied into ruins with whetted blades. Were you not weaned off father like the others? Why were you fed milk until such a big age? Your father was a person, a man beholden to something beyond you. His blackness, for one example. The color of disappearance, for another. Why this desire to break those monuments of absence into mourning? Have you ever seen a strangler fig? Accustomed yourself to its grip. Let the branches attach, vine, hollow out that sour feeling. Black girl, go ahead. Let it make you pretty with its gaping. Let blackness swallow black men as it does. Let what will be, be.
There's something so... I've got goosebumps. I really love this poem. I think Welcome, friends. I think the aspect of this poem that I love, and I'm going to get very nerdy about it, is these images that you use that are contradictory and oxymoronic, and you use maternal language to speak about fatherhood. This opening stanza, it is written, prophesied into ruins with whetted blades, were you not weaned off father like the others? I love that image. And I love the sense of delight. There's a kind of I imagine you giggling behind. There's a kind of a wicked glee in mixing and playing with gender, which is something I love to do.
Yes.
Love to do. But yeah, I also want to ask about this. Yeah, about this last stanza. Black girl, go ahead. Let it make you pretty with its gaping. Let blackness swallow black men as it does. Let what will be, be. There's such ambiguity in the way that you end that off. What is it that we're letting be? And what is, especially this line, let blackness swallow black men as it does. For me, it feels, also because, interpretation is just multifaceted, can move in all kinds of directions, as personal as our fingerprints. So the way that it lands on me is a sort of resignation. It's like you stepping back from a mess that you never made, but a mess that nonetheless affects you. Tell me a little bit about the writing of this poem.
Right. This poem was very much a call out. I think when I was writing the poem, what I was trying to get at was what it means to like enter a space that's supposed to be safe and where you're supposed to be affirmed, and then to kind of be smacked in the face with kind of, you know, your pain is an inevitability, therefore let's move on, is kind of the sentiment behind the statement that pushed me to write this poem. And so it's interesting because I did try to delight and have as much fun as possible when I was writing the collection, especially with form and shape. This was not one of those poems. I think this poem, I kind of had to beat it out of myself a little bit. But I have a thing with plants. I'm kind of obsessed with them. And so I really did have fun with that one image that I tried to thread into the poem and have it be, I wanted it to pack a punch with the strangler fig. Strangler figs are like these trees that basically take over other trees and they hollow them out, right? Until what is left is not even a corpse of a tree. It's mostly the invader that's left. But why is it so gorgeous? If you've ever seen a strangler fig, oh my goodness, they are beautiful. And so I was like, okay, let's play with that. Let's at least make the pain pretty so that we can put it down. Yeah.
One of my favorite definitions of beauty, which I will butcher because it is beautiful and long, but there's like bits and pieces of it that I love very much, is by Saidiya Hartman. And she says that beauty is not a luxury, it is a transfiguration of the given. It is an embrace of our terribleness. It is radical possibility in the space of enclosure. And I love, right?
Yeah.
What? Let's take a moment and just, oh man. What I love about that definition of beauty, especially that like part, that like, that feature, that embrace of our terribleness, that it feels like that strangler fig, that it has this base, almost sinister, but sinister from the perspective of a human observer.
Right.
But as the strangler fig, it is enacting its own genetic code, I suppose, that it's being a plant. Yeah. Like, and that still in, it says I feel so much about us, the way that we behave nature, the way that we observe nature behave, rather. And I love this image of violence and chaos, but beauty and enwrapment. It feels like a boa, I love snakes too, so it's just such a beautiful snaky image. Another poem that I'd love for you to read, and then we can kind of go on about form and your experimentations into innovation. I'm very nerdy about form. I love breaking and queering established and received forms of poetry. And this poem, which is literally right next to the one that we just read, Another Therapist. This one is called 21 Questions with an Expatriate 3, and it's on page 65. And it's a list poem.
Yeah.
But it's a list poem that doesn't start at number 1. So I'd love for you to read it, and then we can talk about it.
Okay. 21 Questions with an Expatriate 3. 18. How's your Korean? Whenever I am asked how many languages I speak, I don't mention all the words I've misplaced. At least I still know how to say sun in 5 different ways. Sun, litsatsi, ilang, son, he. 19. How are the people? I don't know much about people. 20. Have you learned how to be a person yet? I get up to marvel at the long-armed octopus pressing itself against the glass. Later, the server grabs one out of the tank, cooks it alive, and I wonder if I should be eating something, if I can't bear to watch it die. With nakjibokum on our tongues, my date and I speak about friendship, vegetarianism, that one scene in Old Boy. Later, tired of my mask, I strip down to my skeleton. My date doesn't care for the theatrics, but thinks I have pretty bones. Is that what it means to be a person? 21. When will you return? I want to make a ramshackle home. Out of all the words I know, it will be sun-dappled, holy, whole.
I love this poem.
Me too.
And I love, yeah, right? Gosh. And I love also that it's a series, that it's a interview that we return to, this sort of like format that meanders and threads its way like a little tendril throughout the book. The poems, I must say, are so alive that they have their own intelligences. Mm-hmm. They have their own desires. They have their own cadences. I feel sometimes a lot of them have their own personalities. Mm-hmm. Coming back and reading some of these poems again after hearing them online also feels like they change their faces sometimes. I feel like when we close the book, they gossip with one another, you know, and they steal things from one another and swap. There's this lucid gossamer thin membrane. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about splitting up a list poem that really does feel like at times a window into conversations that you're having, like on a date or something. Yeah. But then sometimes we feel like we're on a date with you. Mm. And then at sometimes we feel like we're intruding on this very beautiful confession that maybe you're having a conversation with a therapist or with your diary. There is a sense of confession inside of this too. So yeah, tell me a little bit about this series of poems and a little bit about why you chose a list poem.
So when I was working on this manuscript, one thing that I did differently from the first one is that I tried to read as much poetry as possible. I just read everything I could get my hands on. And there are two poets I came across. One is Franny Choi, and she's written one of my favorite poetry collections ever. It's called The World Keeps Ending, The World Moves On. And she has a Turing test poem. And so looking back on that collection, I definitely did the poet thing, which is to steal like an artist. I stole that idea and I was like, I'm going to do that in my book. It was also inspired by another iteration of this sort of like interview conversation poem written by Sumitra Chakravorty, and she did something similar in her work. And so, yeah, I mean, I had so much fun writing this series, which is actually just like one really long poem broken up into 3. I had the hardest time closing it, so I'm very chuffed actually now reading part 3 with how it turned out. Yeah, that's partly Nick's thanks to Nick. Thank you Nick for that. Like, editors come in and save the day sometimes because you're like, what did I write down and how do I fix it? But yeah, definitely poetry begets poetry, and this series of poems is a testament to that.
Can we talk a little bit about your influences and some of the poets that you've been listening to and thinking about?
Yeah.
And also, because sometimes this like influence question gets like, I think, could you tell me a little bit about what it is that from each of the poems or each of the poets that you drew from, leaned on? Mm-hmm. What did you learn from them, or what did you steal from them as a little thief?
Funny you ask, you're one of them. Yeah, I mean, you're one of my inspirations. I have Everything is a Deadly Flower in my Seoul apartment, and I would read it over and over, and I was really moved by your work. So thank you for that. You're one of my influences. Definitely, when I was in university, at that time, Collective Amnesia came out, and at that time, it was published by Uhlanga, and I decided I want that publishing press. And then Megan Ross's Milk Fever came out, and I was like, I doubly want that publishing press. And then Deadly Flower came out, and I was like, oh my God, this is impossible. But definitely, I'm inspired by a lot of Uhlanga poets, namely Maneo Mohale and Megan Ross, and at the time, Koleka Patuma. And then I have a lot of American poets, a lot of female and queer poets that I love to return to. Ocean Vuong being one, Franny Tre mentioned earlier. Oh goodness! Now I have to name all the poets I like.
It doesn't have to. No, I think
I'm
that's
just like.
I really love Franny Choi too. My favorite of her collections is Soft Science.
I love Soft Science. I just reread it.
Delicious.
And the cover?
So good. Come on.
It's so beautiful.
So
What?
good. And what I stole from Franny Choi was a sense of the deeply scientific. Like, don't get afraid. Don't be afraid to get as nerdy with it as you ever could. And
Honestly.
it's so beautiful to encounter a collection that is romantic and also erotic, but also really nerdy and like moves through quantum physics and organic chemistry, and it kind of snakes its way through things, and it's really beautiful to know that we share Franny.
Yeah,
It's cool.
that is cool. I think another one just popped into my head. Sally Wen Mao. Love her debut collection, I think it is. Maybe not, but one of her collections is called Oculus. And I think what I usually take from each poet is love language. And one of the reasons why I love poetry, even though a lot of people think that it's kind of difficult, it's abstract, it's hard to get into, is that really poets love language and they play with it. And for me, poetry is the language of leaping. And so that's what I take, I think, each time, not to isolate any one writer, but each time I read a collection and I resonate with it and I love it. I take away that love for language, and I take away lessons in how to play and how to leap, but while maintaining some semblance of control, because you don't want to get too carried away. But you do want to get a little bit carried away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask a little bit about technology, because there's also a sort of Tindery. Since one of the themes that is so beautifully folded into this collection is heartbreak.
Yeah.
And I feel that deeply as a slutty queer, that I have my share of heartbreak, and heart balm and heart resting and heart yearning and heart horniness, all of that stuff. But I really love the sort of oblique references to swiping right and the sort of digital texture of intimacy that kind of filters its way through this collection. So tell me about your decision to kind of fold that into Rootbound as well.
Right. Yeah. So in case anyone is wondering, I do have 2 Tinder poems, like poems in the form of a Tinder profile, I guess, in the collection. Partly because even though the collection is a collection about loss, it's also a collection about love. And I think what I was trying to go for is, I don't know, I feel like I hear all the time, like, this writer is such a millennial writer. And then I read their work and I'm like, where? I don't know, maybe it's different depending on like where you're from or whatever. But I wanted the collection to be a very millennial collection. So there's a poem called Adulting, a fairy tale, in which adulting is shown to be the very opposite of a fairy tale, which feels very millennial. There's the Tinder poems. Yeah.
Could you please read Swipe Right 1 and Swipe Right 2? And then,
dear.
since you mentioned these other ones, I think it would be really beautiful just to kind of weave our way through that.
Sure.
Yeah, I love these poems. So just so that you can kind of see them, for anyone that doesn't have them, they kind of feel like a little like Tinder profile. The first one, Swipe Right 1, is on page 38.
Okay. Bio. Small voiced, tender breasted, tightly wound. Remembers the Korean word for face by picturing a room full of ghoulish leers. Speaks about home in abstractions. Once loved to be concrete and textured right. Brittle like bone, left to soak in soda. Say soda now. Neat-limbed, but mind the fissures, mind the pebbled teeth, mind the soft gummy tissue. Might open if you promise to crack first.
I really love how that's sneaky with its eroticism. There's a sense of eros, but there's also a sense of irritation. There's just like this to it, which I love.
Because have you ever been on a dating app?
Yes.
That is why.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. The pits.
I spend a lot of time on dating apps. Anthropologically, of course.
For research.
For research. For slutty social research.
Sorry.
Yes. Swipe Right 2, and then we can go into adulting, which I would love to hear you read.
Okay. Where did I put that poem? 62? Thank you. Swipe Right 2. Bio. Don't picture this. One moment the air is air. The next, the air is thick smoke, and everyone directs their hungry eyes at me, the honey they will feast on to escape to a new home. Picture me as I demand. Picture me as the falling ginkgos that line the sidewalk, not their beloved leaves, the pungent fruit that never draws a hand, a tongue. Except for yours. I want yours tracing the borders of my ink. Pocket me, darling. Let me make a mess against the flap of your fabric. Just this once, let me be the one heavy with nectar, seeking refuge, finding you.
I love this line, which I will steal for absolutely real. I'm telling you now while you're looking at me in the eyes.
Okay.
So that when you see it pop up somewhere, don't be surprised. I love this line. Picture me as I demand.
Yes.
How yummy. How delicious. How defiant. Like there's this sense of I hate this word, but I love this word here, that there's a sense of like entitlement. There's just a sense of like, you will see me as I would love to be seen, as I demand to be seen in my fullness or in my halfness or in a sort of demure stand. Like I love that. But
Yeah.
picture me as I demand is definitely something I'm going to pocket for myself. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. Adulting and fairy tale.
What page is that one on? Thank you.
Thank you.
You're our favorite. Yeah, we need to hire you.
Adulting, a fairy tale. Your head falls on the desk in slumber. Cold tea spills, a lake of brown that drips onto the wooden floor and snakes towards another crack. The desktop winces. Tabs pop open like startled eyes. It doesn't matter. You have turned into a log on the forest floor. Moss begins to dust your skin green. You are a tunnel now, and all see your open body, your little forest. You are a house of houses, a dream woman. In your disappearing, you will birth lichen and livort and fruiting bodies, and the light will touch you where something more than a tired life can and will bloom.
As much as you describe that poem as like anything but a fairy tale, in the sweet cadence of your voice, it turns into one. It turns into something so soft, and so much of the images are so electronic and soaked with exhaustion, that kind of like doom scrolly feeling of sitting in front of a desktop and like searching for something and searching and searching and searching, and like the feeling of tabs open in your brain and too many tabs open on your phone and too many tabs open on your like Internet Explorer, whatever it is that you choose. And I love this, I would say, superpower that you have, of turning alienation, exhaustion, separation, distance into something warm and alive and verdant. It just feels so green. It makes me want to step away from my phone and like step away from the computer and take a walk in the park or something. Just fall asleep underneath a tree or water my plants.
Yes.
In a real way. I'd love for you to read the closing poem before we open up for questions, because you've been listening to us yap. And yeah, we want to leave plenty of time for chats, and also plenty of time for you to explore the bookstore and for you to pick up copies of the book as well. One for yourself and one for someone that you have a crush on.
Yes.
Or two people that you have crushes on, because we do not discriminate here. But yeah, I'd love for you to close us off before we open up to the audience.
Yeah. Okay. So Dedication 2 is a sister poem, almost like an older sister poem to Dedication 1. And as much as it is a collection about loss and grief, it's also a collection about healing and becoming. And so I wanted to end on a hopeful note with Dedication 2. Today you sit with Kay on a rooftop in Hebangchon, and the buildings around you are like mountains. Namsan Tower pointing skyward as though to command them higher. Your fingers curl, and you think, Taba, mountain, be happy. Think, Hebang, liberation, Chon, village. Eventually, Kay finds you seats inside, where you write while looking out the window, mountain after mountain protruding into view. Taba, Taba. Later, you will melt the wax beads and seal this poem inside, entrust it to the ocean of time, hoping that one of our future selves grabs it from the depths and opens it to find, Taba, you are here, some kind of freedom.
Thank you so much, Manti,
Thank
for
you.
giving us this gift. And yeah, it is such a exciting voice. And it's such an honor to have you as a sibling now. And I can't wait to see everything that you do and everything that you write and how this book moves and who it touches. It's been delicious just to launch it into the air, into the ground, to put the little seedlings into the earth with you. Yeah, there aren't any words, even though words are kind of our thing, but it's so beautiful. I would love to ask anyone if they have any questions for Manti. Don't be shy we don't bite, we just nibble.
Run away to, yes. I chose South Korea at first because it seemed like the best option at the time. And then what cemented the decision, funnily enough, is language. I stumbled upon a really terrible K-drama that I could not for the life of me stop watching. And I said, this language is beautiful. And I got bamboozled into thinking that it would be easy to learn because it's quite phonetic and it's easy to learn the alphabet and it's easy to learn how to read. But the grammar then punches you in the face, which is a story for another day. But yeah, I was drawn in by what seemed like the most stable package. And then the thing that cemented it for me was language. Yeah.
I wanted to ask your view on forgiveness. And I remember in the Jack Brandon poem, you spoke about patience and forgiveness and what are the biggest lessons you learned from it and what it looks like for you.
I think this is a difficult question because I'm one of those people who I hold grudges and I will carry them to my grave. But yeah, I think forgiveness it's interesting. For me, it's one of those things that, especially in the context of this book, kind of comes and goes. But I think the book was that first step towards forgiveness because it allowed me to, it was very cathartic, right? It allowed me to get a lot of things off of my chest. And so, yeah, I mean, forgiveness good, as your therapist would say. But, you know, sometimes you got to do things for the plot, guys. Like, I think it's funny to hold grudges, and so I will take some of them to my grave. Yes. Hello.
Is there a poem that you wish made it in here? Such a good question.
Ooh. Do you know what? I think there was a poem that got booted for its lack of rigor, but it had so many plants in it, you guys. It had like, I threw all the house plants in my apartment into that into that poem, and I was like, yeah. Nick and I we fought over that one a little bit. But, you know, it is what it is. The poem lives in my heart and in my laptop. And it's one of those where, like, if you asked me to share it with you, I would. I don't mind. I mean, yeah. I'm a plant mommy. I had to. Yeah, it was supposed to be actually the closing poem of the collection, but some things are not meant to be. Oh. One day, your roots will break beautiful.
Nick and I had a similar tussle. It was Nick wasn't even my editor. I had a really beautiful editor named Francine Simon, and Nick and I and Francine were in a little whirlwind. And the poem that ends my collection is a poem called False Puru, but it was kind of the opposite. I almost left it out, and Nick was like, "No, this is." In the very early version of the manuscript that I slid over to him, he was like, no, it was like in the middle, it was a very random poem. And he was like, nope, this is a beautiful poem and it's so powerful, we're going to end with it. So I love that question about like all of the poems that don't make it. And it's a difficult process to kind of prune.
Yeah.
How was your experience working with Nick as an editor?
It was really interesting. I think when submitting the manuscript, obviously I had all the confidence in the world. I was like, everybody's going to want this book. I'm going to be famous. I was a whole diva about it. Come Nick's email saying, yes, we're going to publish. And then all my confidence went out the window. All my confidence gone. So like Nick was a godsend because he was like, you have something here. And I really looked to him to help me with things that I really struggled with, like, you know, rhythm, meter, and stuff like that. But it was really fun. It was interesting. We did have a few tussles. But mostly it was a really, yeah, he made like editing doable for me because it's so fun being a writer when you're just putting it down on the page and you're like, I'll fix it later. And then later comes and then you have a mental breakdown. So, yeah, it was really fun working with Nick. And he really was the confidence boost that I needed. It's so funny how like all the confidence leaves you once you're like, okay, this is actually going to be an actual book in the world. Yeah.
I passed out in a bathroom.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the day that I that's so random also, wow. But I signed my contract and I was so elated that all the blood rushed to my head, and then I was like, oh, just give me a second, I'm just gonna, and I was there, futs.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was crying in the toilet when I read the acceptance letter. So that's, yeah.
Big feelings.
Wow.
Poets have big feelings.
do.
Big feelings.
We have to put them somewhere for the safety of others.
And give them a pretty face for the safety of others.
Yes.
Goodness gracious. Before we close out, is there any other questions that we might have? Yes.
I'm not sure this. Firstly, thank you. It's a beautiful collection.
Thank you.
I have a selfish question, but I wanted to know if you translated the book into Korean. And the reason I ask is I've started this tradition of buying poetry that's been translated into English as almost like a portal into a specific country or into a specific culture. And I think you have something to maybe to create a portal into Korea.
Yeah. So it's a dream of mine. Currently, my skills are lacking. I would like to someday maybe co-translate or translate for myself the poetry collection. That would be awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Love to see that.
Yeah, because I read what I'm currently doing for language learning because I kind of hate language learning now. But I love reading. So what I do is I read the book in Korean and then I'll quickly read it in English. And it's such an interesting experience and it's so fun. And that would be really interesting to do with poetry as well. I think I'm also kind of possessive. I don't know. It's with prose, you know, this character said this and that character said that. Not to knock prose writers. Obviously, there's so much more going on there. But with poetry, it's like, how do you even begin to translate what that person meant, what they were trying to infuse into the language, what they brought with them into that line, what all the things that they cut away in order for that line to exist, you know? So, yeah, very interesting question. It makes me want to study harder so that I can translate my own collection. Yeah, thank you for that.
There's this really beautiful zine by, I believe, if I'm not being terrible about it, a Korean poet named Don Mi Choi. And they write a beautiful zine called Translation is a Mode. Translation is an anti-neo-colonial mode. So it's really beautiful to encounter people with a passion for translation and poetry and translations. That's a cool practice. Thanks for sharing that for us. Cool. Anybody, yes, I love it. Come through.
I all of you gasped when you read the last line of 21 questions. I want to make a ramshackle poem of all the worlds I know. It will be signed up with Holy Whole. I gasped for many reasons, like one of which is just that it says something that I feel so many of us feel, and you've never had the words to articulate it before. But I also gasped because it felt like you went to Rhodes, and in first year of English literature, you learn all these different definitions of poetry, and one of them is that poetry is the best possible words in the best possible order.
My favorite definition.
And I just felt like this was so that, you know, you couldn't find a better order for those words, and those were the best words, you know. And I wondered, what's the process of finding the best words in the best order? Because I'm sure you tinkered with this until it was that, you know.
That's funny you mention it. I had an English lit professor, Dan Wiley, at Rhodes, and I told him that I was writing poetry, and he was like, well, I hope you're doing it by hand. And then I told him, goodness, no. Why would I do that? It turns out he was right. By the time I started writing this manuscript, what really helped was to start on the page with just pen and paper, and just make a mess all over the page, like literally turn it upside down, write things diagonally. And so I think that's how I find the first iteration. And then it's kind of giving yourself distance from what you've written down, and then coming back to it and trying to give it shape and form, and then not making decisions based on ego, but making decisions based on what's best for the poem, and what the poem needs to be, as opposed to what you want it to be. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of like a long process of putting it down on paper and then distancing yourself from it, returning to it, and then beating away at it until it shapes up into something that feels true to like what the poem itself demands rather than what your ego demands. Yeah.
One of my favorite poets, one of my favorite poets, who's also an Uhlanga sibling, who I looked to, who was the book when I was like, Uhlanga published them, and I was like, I want to publish with them. It was Jenna Gardini. She wrote an incredible collection called Matric Rage. And the first time I encountered a poem that also shook me, when I was like, that feeling of like, there could not be better words in a better order. I didn't even know that words could do that. I didn't even know that language could make me feel this way. It's a poem called Performance Scale. When I asked Jenna, who's now, I'm very, very, very thankful to call a friend. When I asked Jenna, I was like, how did you write that? How did that even happen? And she says that her process is free association, that she sits and, with pen and paper and just in an automatic sort of way, just in trying to destabilize the critic in your head, that like editor that stops you from writing even before you pick up a pen, because like, nothing you write could ever be in a whatever. And she just writes and writes and writes for days and days and days, and then lets it like sit and percolate and simmer and like ferment, and then comes back to the place and finds interesting things like dusting for gold. So that's a really cool process. Thank you for for giving us that. Ma, you have a question.
Hi, Mommy.
For me, it's not really a question, but more of a comment. You know, just to say to Manti, I am glad that she followed her path. You know, I mean, as a mother, they know. Having worked in the STEM field, I would have loved to have engineers.
I cannot even do 1 + 1, guys.
I have none of those, you know, and I think when it became clear when she was already at high school that she has this flair for writing, and she loved to read books. And I think one of the important things was that she comes from a family of avid readers, so it was easy to kind of fit in, you know, within that. And I remember we used to go to the library. I used to buy books for them. I mean, they graduated from, what is this, Teen University, High School Valley, yes. And then Valley University.
Sweet
And I mean, it reminds me of myself. Our father was a teacher by profession, and he would buy Reader's Digest, but we had to wait for him to finish.
Discount yourself.
Don't discount yourself. You were the first black female lecturer at back then called Rao. Now it's this.
Oh, we love a flex. Please flex on us.
Yeah.
Very educated lady.
So it's, I mean, I was reading your the political rich guy. I read Reader's Digest. I graduated to your Meals and Bones. And, you know, I mean, when we were growing up, we didn't have all this freedom to say there are so many South African writers, you know, South African poets that are actually putting the poetry onto paper, because you would know that somebody is a poet, but it's like they recite other people's poetry. And I think for me, the journey that she has undertaken makes me proud in the sense that it's about telling your own narrative. I always say that as Africans, especially South Africans, we owe it to ourselves to tell our own narrative, rather than wait for Americans to come and take our narrative, package it the way they want to, and tell it the way they want to, and even decide if it turns into a movie and so on. Who has to be your actor? Like you look at Black Panther, Angela Bassett. I mean, my cousin who played the part in Black Panther, the late Konichume, she could have easily fitted into that, you know, that part that was played by Angela Bassett. They're telling an African story, and through the eyes of Americans, and through the eyes of Angela Bassett. Why not my cousin becoming that person, you know, who takes the lead role? So I love the fact that through the poetry that I've seen develop over the years in South Africa, it's about telling our own narrative. I think at some stage I used to attend poetry sessions at the Winterthur Theatre. I mean, I loved, because they were organized by the Writers Associates, you know, Rax Siakwa and his late wife. And I used to love going there, and a lot of people would be like, really, do you have time to be going and sitting and listening to poets, you know, reciting poems and talking about the poetry itself? And I said, I found it fascinating. And for me, it was a welcome change from, I could have gone to the movie, but I chose to go to Winterthur Theatre, you know, just to get that sense of this South African story that is being told by a South African. And that for me, you know, is something that I've always lamented to say. People say South Africans don't write books. I beg to differ, we do. The fact that Manthipe's poetry is published in literary journals says a lot. To say, yes, a South African, based in South Korea, telling her own story, and it lands in a journal. And that for me is huge. And I think as a family, we really are proud of her. And we're really proud of her.
Thank you, Mama. No! Don't make me cry.
Thank you so much, Mama, and also thank you for bringing Mom Connie's name into the room. Also, and thank you everyone. Thank you to my incredible debut poet and Uhlanga sibling. And please, please, please do pick up a couple of copies of this fantastic collection, and support independent bookstores. Love you guys. Thank you so much for being here.